The most important part to any zoo is the animals in the enclosures they call home. Throughout the series, I'll be designing different enclosures for an array of animals, whilst also keeping guest interaction at the forefront of every build. Join me each week as I tackle a new enclosure and idea and try and bring it to life within Planet Zoo. Today I'm building a striped skunk enclosure. Now with this build I was a little unsure what to do, but I knew the skunks didn't need a lot of space, so I built a fairly small enclosure and sort of used ideas that I'd seen around online to build this cute little habitat that you'll see throughout the build. Here are the stats, and like mentioned, land requirement isn't that important, hence the small enclosure. The group sizes as well, they can only have up to two skunks in an enclosure, so for this build I've just got one male. Starting the build, obviously as you can see I've got this lovely little space here next to the two generators, and this is why I thought the skunk was the perfect animal to put in this space. Mainly because it's just an awkward little patch within the zoo and I wanted to make the most of that area. So as you can see here, I'm sort of laying out the sort of foundations, the barriers of where I want the enclosure to be, and this is the bit that I'd seen online, this kind of cool conservatory look that's on an angle, obviously, so guests can get the best possible view. Something else I wanted to try in this build was designing my own barriers. So here I've got this mesh fencing, and these come in like panels, and obviously you can change the color, which you've seen me do there. And this I just placed along the edge, basically where I wanted the sort of outline to be. I do also put another fence piece next to the conservatory bit to really close it in. I think as the build went on, I was a bit like, why have I got these really high fences? It is just a skunk at the end of the day. But I guess with most zoos, they would have multi-purpose enclosures. So this could just be a temporary thing for the skunk, as maybe in the future I might decide to put something else in this enclosure. With the main fencing complete, I wanted to carry on along the top here, which I'd done along the top of the conservatory with this slightly smaller panel, and overall I was really impressed with the result. So impressed with the result, I done the same thing on the back wall with some slightly larger panels. Now you will see me sort of toy with the idea of a roof, but it wasn't really leveling out very well, and because the enclosure was a bit of an awkward shape, it just wouldn't have looked very flush either side. So in the end I decided against that, as it wasn't really necessary. Something that was really nice about this build was I already had that back wall in place with the gate as well. I think just not worrying about trying to fit that into the build definitely helps, and it'll be something I consider for future builds, especially around this area, as it's very awkward in terms of the space and shape. Yes, I could move the paths, but I don't want large enclosures everywhere around the zoo. The last thing to do before moving the skunk in was to place the null barriers to make this an official enclosure. The skunk in, it was time to fill the enclosure, so I used this pre-built bed, mainly because of spacing, and also the roof wouldn't really work. And I guess with that little conservatory bit, they do have a bit of a hard shelter there anyway. I didn't want to go over the top with plants as well, but first off I wanted to get the important things in, like the food and water bowls and the enrichment, to make sure that was all in first before placing any plant. With the foliage I wanted to keep it fairly simple, so I used these flower pieces and placed one tree so guests had the best possible view. Overall I'm really happy with this build, and it was nice to build something this small and use my own different style of fencing, so in the future that's definitely something I'm going to consider, and I think it's definitely taught me that not all enclosures have to be massive. With the zoo starting to take shape, I thought I'd show you all how far we've got. So at the front here we had the red pandas, which was the very first enclosure I built, as well as the giant tortoise and the crocodile behind the camera. Moving on down this footpath here, we have our first lot of guest facilities, which you can just see in view, as well as the flamingos, which are to the left. And down here is my favourite area of the zoo, which is the mini Africa area, which I guess you could say includes the lion enclosure, which is on the opposite side of the path, which was one of the first African animal enclosures I built within this series. There is plans to extend more of the Africa area in the future, because I'd love to get meerkats in there, as well as rhinos and other African animals. Carrying on over the first guest bridge that I built within this series, it's definitely encouraged me to build more things at height and try out different viewing platforms like guest show areas. We're now coming to the end of the mini Africa area as we fly over into the lemur enclosure. Now this enclosure does look very bare from the sky, which I did say within the episode that I built it, and it does look very empty as there are no guests in there at the moment, but when there are guests in there, I can assure you it does look a bit more alive. We're now going to fly over to some more recent builds like the king penguins here. I fiddle about with the water a little bit more off screen, and you can definitely see within that enclosure much better this time. Opposite the penguins is the capybaras, which in this build was the first time we used the viewing dome, and I've seen guests use that a handful of time, and it's nice to see the capybaras there running up onto that roof. We're now flying over a very barren part of the zoo, I think, where we had the mountain goats here. Whilst I am impressed with this enclosure, I think because I haven't built anything else around near them, it's kind of very empty around here. And with the crocodile house to the right there and the future plan to have a bug house attached to it, it's really awkward to fill in that space and see what will work. I'm currently flying over the bear enclosure, which was very early on in the build, and this involved a lot of foliage. We're back round to the zoo entrance, and overall I'm really happy with how this zoo is looking. I think the only things that need work on is definitely that left side there where the crocodile house is, mainly because it's looking a bit empty at the moment, but we're filling in the space nicely, which you can see here from this aerial shot.